The fog lay so thick over Caithness that the hills disappeared. 14 men died in the fire. One survived and stayed silent for nearly the rest of his life. On the wrist of one of the dead, they found an identity bracelet. It read, "His Royal Highness, the Duke of Kent." It was the 25th of August, 1942. Britain was at war. The dead man was 39 years old, the younger brother of King George VI, the uncle of the future Queen Elizabeth II. He was the first royal in more than 400 years to die on active service. But he did not become a legend, and the official files about him remain sealed to this day. George Edward Alexander Edmund was born on the 20th of December, 1902, at York Cottage, Onudbanorn, the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. He was the fourth son of King George V and Queen Mary. Before him stood Edward, Albert, and Henry. That meant close enough to the crown to be controlled, but too far away to be truly needed. His father, George V, believed in duty, in the Navy, in discipline. Warmth was rare. At 13, George was sent to the Naval College at Osborne, like his brothers before him. He hated it. He suffered from severe seasickness. But he had something his brothers did not: a sharp mind. He was academically the most gifted in the family. He took an interest in art, theater, interior decoration, music. In a family that valued bearing above inner life, he was a prince with too much inner life. Even so, he stayed in the Navy until 1929, serving on various ships. In April 1928, he was initiated into the Navy Lodge of the Freemasons. It was the lodge of the service to which he still belonged. He later rose within Freemasonry to become Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England. In the spring of 1929, he left the naval service, and London opened before him like a forbidden door. In the late 20s, George moved in circles the palace regarded with suspicion. Artists, actresses, writers, bohemians. He had his suits tailored at Anderson and Shepherd, his shirts made at Hawes and Curtis, and went. To the barber, George F. Trumper. The double-breasted cut with the long, rolled lapel was named after him, the Kent. But behind the elegance lay something else. A woman named Alice Gwynn, called Kiki Preston, an American heiress and cousin of the Vanderbilts, had met George in the mid-20s. She was on her second marriage. She was dependent, and she carried a silver syringe with her. In London, she was known as the girl with the silver syringe. She introduced George to a dangerous habit. He became dependent himself. Her habit was so open that she took him into hotel rooms, into apartments, into private salons. A royal with a silver needle in his arm was not a scandal the palace could survive. When his elder brother Edward, the later Edward VIII, learned of it, he intervened. In 1929, he forced Kiki Preston to leave England. He took George with him to Sandringham and supervised his withdrawal there over the course of months. Edward, no moral exemplar himself, later wrote in his memoirs, A King's Story. Although George was 8.5 years my junior, I found in his character qualities that were akin to my own. We became more than brothers. We became close friends. It was one of the few real acts of brotherly rescue in the history of the House of Windsor. Edward could protect George from Kiki. He could not protect him from his other rumors. George wrote love letters to men. At least one of these letters was used to blackmail him. The letters were bought back by the British Secret Service. His father, George V, knew of this and was shaken. It was not the only such case, but George was the only one who was both blackmailable and princely at the same time. One of the recipients is said to have been the playwright Noel Coward. Another, the art historian Anthony Blunt, who would later be exposed as a Soviet spy. It is documented that Coward, decades later, told the historian Michael Thornton, "We had a little dalliance." It is also documented that the daughter of the press baron Lord Beaverbrook after the war saw love. Letters from the Duke of Kent to Coward in her father's safe. Beaverbrook had had them stolen from Coward's house in Belgravia. After Beaverbrook's death in 1964, the letters were gone. In 1934, George married Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. The wedding took place on the 29th of November at Westminster Abbey. Among the bridesmaids was Princess Elizabeth, the future queen. Marina wore a gown by Edward Molyneux of white and silver brocade. At its hem worked Russian émigré seamstresses whom her mother had brought from a ruined Russia. To the public, it looked like a fairy tale. To the palace, it was also a security arrangement, a home, children, duties, order. 2 years later, George V died. Edward became king. 11 months after that, he abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. In the final weeks before the abdication of December 1936, the palace considered skipping Albert and Henry and making George king instead. He was more charming than Albert, more popular than Henry, and he already had a male heir. In the end, it was Albert, George VI, and George, the fourth son, was left behind. Loyal, hurt, politically harder to place than the palace. Could afford. In February 1937, George met his brother Edward in Austria. That same year, a Foreign Office document noted that the Duke of Kent had developed a close relationship with Joachim von Ribbentrop, the German ambassador in London. Ribbentrop became Hitler's foreign minister in 1938. That is the documented connection. In May 1941, Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, had parachuted alone into Scotland, officially to negotiate peace with Britain. From this, conspiracy theories have built an entire structure in which George was supposedly involved in the Hess flight. That cannot be supported. What can be supported is this. George appeared on the MI5 list of British aristocrats who associated with the Nazi spy, Princess Stephanie von Hohenlohe. During the war, he joined the RAF. In July 1941, he became a staff officer in the welfare section under the Inspector General. His task was to strengthen the morale of the troops. He toured RAF stations, met men, shook hands. He was 39. On the 4th of July, 1942, Marina gave birth to their third son, Prince Michael. 7 weeks later, George flew to Scotland. On the morning of the 25th of August, 1942, a flying boat was waiting at Invergordon. A short Sunderland Mark III, serial number W4026. On board, 15 men. Destination: Reykjavik. A morale visit to RAF stations in Iceland. At 13:05, the aircraft took off. It flew into fog. It drifted off course. It should have stayed over the sea. Instead, it flew over land. Too low. At 13:42, it struck a hillside in Caithness, at a place called Eagle's Rock. The engines were running at full power on impact. 14 men died. Only one survived. Flight Sergeant Andrew Jack, the tail gunner. His turret had broken off on impact and been thrown clear of the fire. He was found nearly 24 hours later by a local girl, severely burned. The official inquiry reached a clear conclusion: a navigational error by the pilot. Blame was placed on Flight Lieutenant Frank Goyen, an experienced Australian. But Andrew Jack did not believe it was fair. He spoke of it hardly ever again, for the rest of his life. He had been sworn to silence. His niece, Margaret Harris, broke that silence only 60 years later. She said, Andrew Jack had told his family that the Duke of Kent himself had been at the controls, and that a 16th person had been on board, whose identity was never revealed. The flight plan disappeared. The inquiry papers disappeared. The royal archives concerning Prince George remain sealed to this day. George was buried on the 29th of August, 1942, in the royal vault beneath St. George's Chapel at Windsor. Marina outlived him by 26 years. She became president of Wimbledon. She never spoke publicly about the circumstances of his death. On the hill above Dunbeath, there now stands a stone cross. The fog comes and goes, and the files remain sealed.